Patrick Cook here. So thank you for joining me in another session of our Mandelbulb 3D Gotcha series. Now, we're going to talk about a particular gotcha here that actually results in a hard crash. That is, the Mandelbulb application just simply goes away. It crashes. Now, before I get into that, let me just remind you to go to GTA.4. That's the very first session of this series, where I talk about what we're trying to accomplish with this gotcha series. The first 8 minutes or so of that particular session, GTA.4, that will give you a pretty good understanding what we're trying to accomplish in this gotcha series. All right, now let's get into this new gotcha, which I named the Navigator Danger Zone, and that's because this particular application crash will actually happen with a certain use of the Navigator. Now, I will tell you up front that I have not found a repeatable pattern for this particular Mandelbulb application crash. But I have found how to completely avoid it. Okay? So let me give you a little bit of background here. We turn our attention to the Mandelbulb application. I have a very simple Mandelbulb up here. This is the bulb that is the default when you launch the Mandelbulb application. And you can see here that I can go in here and I can calculate it very quickly. I can pull up the Navigator, all right, and I can maneuver around. I can move and stuff. All right, so you know all of this. The Navigator has a feature which apparently, from what I can tell, is part of the original design. In other words, it hasn't been added at some point in the future. It's the original design. And it's actually a pretty good design. All right, very useful. And that is this right here. Navigator Size. All right. You can actually pull it. This is 100%. You can actually pull this down and you can go to maybe 150%. Okay. And that's very useful, actually, because you can actually see better where you're at. Now, of course, you know that the Navigator is a low resolution rendering of your Mandelbulb. And you also know, maybe you should know, that you pull the Mandelbulb parameters from the main view, the main editor, over to the Navigator using the parameter button. And of course, you can send back to the main view using the view to main button. Okay. So the Navigator gives us the ability to navigate, all right, and then send the parameters back to main. All right. Now, so this feature right here, this is what we're focusing on in this particular gotcha session. You see here, I can change the view. Well, that's pretty good. All right. And I can also use this button to walk down the view. Okay. All right, I can use this button to walk up the view. That's all very good. That's very, very good. Now, as it turns out, that's a good feature. It comes in handy. It works until it doesn't work. And that's what I want to show you here. Now, what I'm going to do, just to be careful, I'm going to close the Mandelbulb. I'm going to restart it again. Now I'm just making sure that everything's clear and clean. I'm going to go to internal. I'm going to set this to idle. The reason I do this is because when my camera, my OBS camera screen capturing software application will stutter when Mandelbulb renders. Now I've found that if I set this to idle, I won't get that stuttering effect in my OBS screen capture. So that's why I do that. This has nothing to do with the gotcha, it doesn't have any impact on whether the gotcha occurs or not. So I'm going to set that to idle so we don't get stuttering in my screen capture. All right, I'm going to just go ahead and do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a more complex Mandelbulb. This particular scene has 4 formulas assigned to it. It is an alternate mode. All right, you can learn all about the formulas and the hybrid and also the formula slots in my formulas tutorial. All right, so this particular Mandelbulb, this is from my macro animation, which is up on my creative channel. I've got 4 formulas, and the point being is that this is a more complex, a heavier Mandelbulb scene with 4 formulas that are in alternate mode. Okay, let's go over to the Navigator. All right, just like we did before in that more simpler single bulb or single formula example. Now this is where things get interesting, because I've got the same feature, all right, and I can pop it down here, and I can go to 120%, I can go to 80%, you know, and I can walk it down, and I could walk it up, and I could go to 200%. All right, that's pretty good. And of course I can do all kinds of movements down here just like normal. All right, the Navigator functionality doesn't change, but I can get a bigger view. Now, what I have found is that seemingly randomly, this is where the Mandelbulb will crash. When I'm manipulating this, all right, this Navigator Size feature. Now, I have not been able to find a particular pattern, all right? In other words, a particular set of mouse clicks that will actually cause the Mandelbulb to crash. It seems to be very random, but it is there. Now, I can tell you that I have never experienced the problem as long as I kept my Navigator in 100%. Okay? I have experienced the problem quite often when I am manipulating and there it goes. So the Mandelbulb application has crashed. As you can see there, I didn't have any particular pattern, all right, of mouse strokes, and you can also see that the Mandelbulb application just suddenly quit. Now, if we take a look here, this is the Windows Event Viewer, and one of the logs is application. All right, if I refresh that, there is the crash. That is the crash. Now, if I look at the details here, we can see here that the crash happened in the Mandelbulb executable. That's the program. All right. It's not telling us much of anything. The module name is unknown. So we don't even know what module within the source code this particular crash happened. All right. And we do know from, if I dig really deep into the error logs that this application will generate, and for instance, a little bit more information here. We see here, there's the Mandelbulb, and there's the version, all right, and all in here, these are logs that Windows will put out. Now, I've analyzed those logs, all right, and it comes down to what apparently is happening is what's called a buffer overflow. And that's what this event name says. All right, that's Windows code for meaning a buffer overflow. Now, what that typically means is that the application's code tried to do something that involved a null value. A null value in software technology is a value that doesn't. It's typically a value that doesn't have any value. In other words, it doesn't have a 1 or a 2 or a 0. It has no value at all. So the Mandelbulb evidently was trying to write or manipulate or handle a value that didn't have any value, and therefore what's called an unhandled exception occurred. And since it was unhandled and it was an exception, in other words, an unhandled error, the Mandelbulb didn't know what to do with it and simply closed the application. Or I might be more accurate in saying that Windows closed the application. Because what happened is Windows got to a point where it says, nah, I can't allow this. You're stomping on protected memory. You're obviously doing something that's insecure. You're doing something that's a violation of the internal Windows procedures or safety or whatever. So an unhandled exception occurred. All right, and either Mandelbulb shut itself down or Windows shut it down. But what we do know here is that we have recreated a problem where the Mandelbulb application will simply go away. It will crash. And if you have any unsaved work, well, you're going to lose that work. Okay? So here's the summary. I'm not going to bother putting that big one in. I'm not going to try to even reproduce this. I'm just going to kind of summarize it for you and give you an idea how to avoid this problem. All right, so in summary, what I have found is that the Mandelbulb application may crash, and somewhat randomly, based upon your manipulation or your movement of these values under the Navigator size. I have not been able to establish a pattern. In other words, you go from 100 to 170 to 80. I haven't established that pattern. I also haven't established whether or not the pattern is these up and down. All right. So I have not been able to ascertain a particular pattern. But what I do know, based upon observation and experience, I've been working with the Mandelbulb since, 2017. Yeah, that's about right. Hundreds of projects and dozens of animations. And I can tell you from observation what I have concluded. I've concluded that a simple single formula Mandelbulb will never, in my experience, has never had a crash related to the Navigator Size. Okay? I could also tell you that no matter how complex or simple my Mandelbulb is, I have never had a crash when I'm simply sitting in 100% all the time. I have experienced crashes, and we just showed one actually occurring, if it's a multi-formula or a more complex Mandelbulb, and you are changing the Navigator size. Okay? So how to avoid this is actually pretty simple, and it's what I do. It doesn't matter what I do over here, I always leave the Navigator in 100%. And I have never had Mandelbulb crash like it does when the Navigator size is manipulated with a more complex Mandelbulb. There is no way that I'm aware of to avoid this problem other than stay in 100%. Or keep your Mandelbulbs extremely simple, which you don't want to do. You want to utilize the power of 3 hybrids, 6 formula slots, and 428 different pre-made formulas. You want to be able to utilize that power. You want to be able to push this Mandelbulb hard to get yourself some really, really cool stuff. You don't want to be limited by what might happen over here. Now, I'll leave you with maybe a tip that might work for you. If you prefer to work with this Navigator in large size, pick 190, just to pick something, okay? If you prefer to work with it in a larger size like that, you probably will be okay if you leave it in that 190. In other words, you work with the Mandelbulb, you go back and forth to the editor, you come over the main editor, you work with the lighting, all right, and push it back over, all right. If you stay in the Navigator size that you've selected, you're probably going to be okay. I have found that when the Navigator size is changed with a more complex formula structure, that's when you'll actually run into this Navigator danger zone or this crash. Okay? All right, that's enough for this particular gotcha. I hope this, I'm going to put this in a category of a hard crash that has the potential of you losing work. And I'll leave you with this thought, as I express quite often. Save often. Save often, especially if you're in a very complex multiple formula Mandelbulb. You put a lot of time into it. Maybe you're working on an animation. Save often. We know that we have a particular hard crash over here under certain circumstances, but we just don't, and because we were not able to actually say, well, if you do 40% and then 90% and then back to 20, that's it, that crashes. We can't say that here. So there's always that element of mystery. When is Mandelbulb going to go down on me? I'll leave you with this thought. The Mandelbulb application is a very stable application. All right. You may not think so by the way I talk about these gotchas, but if we understand where these gotchas are and we are prepared with a save often philosophy, then I think we're going to be okay. And you can get a lot of very good creative work from the Mandelbulb3D fractal generator, which is a workhorse, but it does have its flaws. As long as we know where those flaws are, we can work with them and we can avoid them. All right. All right, thanks for joining me in this session. I'm going to put out some other gotcha sessions. I hope those are beneficial to you as well as this one. Take care.